All right, here's my audience of 3 adults over the age of 21 for my speech and communication 101. The title of my speech today is The Mountain That Moved. Have you ever wondered what would happen if a mountain would collapse? Have you ever wondered of the destruction and the terrible things that would take place? Are you aware that this has happened? Today I'm going to tell you about one of the greatest, most incredible, and yet most obscure tragedies in North American history. First of all, let me tell you about a mountain. The mountain was called Turtle Mountain. It rose about 7,000 feet above the valley below. It was a very unstable mountain. It had a base of clastics and coal, and the outside was made up of limestone. And over the centuries, water had seeped into the limestone and made the mountain extremely unstable. Monica Field and David McIntyre have wrote that the Kootenai and Blackfoot Indians had an oral tradition saying that it was the mountain that moves. Turtle Mountain was an ideal place for a coal mine because it had visible coal seams in the base, and it was only several hundred yards away from the railroad track. At the bottom of Turtle Mountain was a small town called Frank. Frank had about 600 people in it, and many of the miners lived in the town of Frank, and their families lived there as well. At night, on April 29th, 1903, a large section of rock, 500 feet deep, 3,280 feet wide, and 1,400 feet high, broke loose from Turtle Mountain and slid down across the town, covering several houses, destroying 2 miles of railroad track, and backing up the Old Man River into a lake. 76 people approximately were killed, and 17 miners were trapped in the coal mine because the entrance caved in. Now, despite this terrible tragedy, there were many stories of courage that came from this disaster. Immediately after the slide, many of the people who were not in the path of the rocks rushed out and began digging and pulling people out of the rocks. And several survivors were pulled out, and many of them were children. One of the most amazing stories was a little baby that was somehow thrown clear of the rocks and landed on a huge boulder that had somehow, in smashing a barn, picked up some hay, and the child landed on the hay and was unharmed and went on to live a very happy and productive life. The 17 miners that were trapped in the mine spent over 12 hours digging themselves out, and they were in a race against time because they knew that the oxygen would eventually give out and they would die from lack of oxygen. But they were able to dig themselves out to safety. And there was an account of a train that was in the town of Frank over that time, and the engineer heard the noise and recognized it as a rock slide and immediately put the train on full throttle and screamed at his crew to jump into the train, and they were able to get out of the way of the rocks. And after they were out of the way, 2 of the crew members rushed back, climbed over the rocks. One of them was too exhausted to go on, and the other man climbed the rest of the way over the rocks and down to the railroad tracks on the other side and flagged a train that was scheduled to come through and stopped it so that it wouldn't smash unknowingly into the pile of rocks that was in its path. So that's the story of Frank Slide, a terrible tragedy that still lies there today in southwest Alberta near the Crow's Nest Pass. And it lies as a visible reminder to the fickleness of human life. And as you can see there, it's quite the picture of the magnificence of the rocks sliding off the mountain and covering many houses and buildings and people. And it reminds us of how fickle life can be and how troubling it is to think that sometimes even the mountains will move. The end.